Hello, my name is Jason Perkowski. Welcome back to this next video clip that's going to take a look today at the gathering information template, as well as a template that allows you to lay out the key principles, key concepts, and the student inquiry questions for the unit that you're developing as part of your multiple menu model unit. So let's look first at the gathering information template. The purpose of this template is to allow you to gather key information onto one place, onto one page, that outlines the discipline that you're attempting to teach to your students. So, for example, the template that I filled out for you today is looking at gifted education as a unit of study. So, you as students in the master's degree program are, in essence, being trained in, the area of gifted education. And if I were to lay out a multiple menu model unit for this course, it would look similarly to the example that I've given you. And so the purpose of gifted education, and notice it's not the purpose of the unit, but the purpose of the field, the purpose of the discipline. The purpose of gifted education as a discipline is to design and implement educational programs that are reasonably calculated to yield meaningful educational benefits and student progress. This includes designing programs that meet students' academic as well as social and emotional needs. So that's the purpose, at least in my estimation, of gifted education as a discipline. The organization of the field I begin to lay out is that there are gifted educators that are within each individual school, or in some cases that have responsibility over a district or over an intermediate unit or a county-wide school system. And so as far as the organization of the field, those of us who are practicing professionals, we are organized underneath the structure of a particular school. For gifted education, it's pretty simple. You have gifted educators at elementary, middle school, as well as high school levels, and some of them have responsibilities for various numbers of students and for various numbers of schools. The next section is major events. This is where you have an opportunity to highlight the key events within the discipline. So in gifted education, one key event is that Chapter 16 was written in 2000 and updated again in 2008, November of 2008 to be specific. And that's what distinguished in 2000 the differences between special education and gifted education. It made them two different fields with two different sets of regulations. Other key events I've highlighted actually under this section on chronology, and so we'll cover those when we get to that section. And you may find that there is some overlap between one section and another, but the purpose for this whole document is for you to be able to brainstorm as many possible sources of information and many possible ideas about the field as you can. And so if there is that overlap, don't allow that to frustrate you. This is not meant to be a perfect document. It's more of a resource for you as you're designing your unit of study to be able to have everything in one place as a starting point for developing the rest of the unit plans. Best case examples. One that comes to mind is of a young boy named Smith who actually was a local Lancaster County student who managed to get through elementary school, middle school, and high school within short order, and by the age of 12 was already off and attending college, and his family was able to identify his particular needs academically as well as socially and provide for those needs, both by offering acceleration to him, but also finding opportunities for him to be able to socialize with students of his own social as well as chronological age. And so in that case, there were a variety of school districts that came in and worked with Mr. Smith, Joseph Smith, in order to be able to develop the specially designed instruction that he needed and to be able to provide the support for him. For example, when he went off to college, his family moved to that college town so that he would have a home structure during the evenings that was appropriate to his age at being 12 years old, but also have the academic needs met as a highly intelligent, gifted student who needed to have college courses at that point in his life. Subdivisions of the field. Well, we're subdivided by grade level. We're subdivided, of course, by school and by county and by state. We're also subdivided sometimes by discipline. So there are academically gifted students, and there might be a program for academically talented mathematics students or academically talented artistic students. And of course, our athletic programs are another good opportunity for giftedness to be fully enriched and developed at a pace that's appropriate to that individual student. Often we as gifted educators don't end up interacting with that field because it's already had a long reputation of being able to coach students from wherever they currently are to meet their full talent. But I just thought I'd mention that that is another area of gifted education. It asks us to list professional journals, so you'll notice that I've listed Gifted Child Quarterly, Gifted Child Today. 2E has a newsletter for twice exceptional students, those who are gifted as well as those who have specific learning support needs. So again, listing as many journals as possible so that when I'm doing further research and developing my unit plan, I've got those resources to go to. And additionally, this may be something I provide as a bibliography to my students. Particularly with gifted ed students, they so often want to go home and do further research if they get particularly excited and curious about a subject. And if I can provide those resources to my students, that allows them to explore it at their pace based on their own individual interest. And I don't have to necessarily teach an entire unit on all the information that's in the field, but I can instead put that information and those resources in the hands of my students and let them explore it on their own. Again, you then move on to listing famous people in the field. These are the folks that anyone who is becoming an expert in the topic, in the discipline, should be aware of. So for gifted education, of course, one needs to begin with Alfred Binet and his work with the intelligence quotient, which was then developed further by Lewis Terman. And Julia Stanley then took that information on to develop Johns Hopkins University's Center for Talented Youth. And we can't forget Lita Hollingworth, one who's known very highly for her work with students' social and emotional needs and helping them to be able to interact effectively with themselves as well as their regular education peers, and was a great practitioner of gifted education in New York. Trivia and humor is listed. Now this may seem superfluous, but by having that trivia and that humor listed, when you're doing your research initially, you may be coming across that information. It's a good idea to have that jotted down, because that makes many times good discussion starters for your students, a light way to begin the class, to get the students' attention, to draw them into the subject. Of course, as teachers, that imagination, that ability to spark the enthusiasm of our kids is important, and humor is a good way to do that. The next section in the form is one on questions. These are questions that are common to the discipline, questions that the discipline wrestles with, or the questions that they utilize in making decisions and approaching the subject matter. So, for example, in gifted education, one of the things that we often discuss and struggle with is how to effectively identify gifted students. We talk about how to balance students' academic needs with their social and emotional needs for those students that are asynchronous, where their academic needs are far and above their maturity level. So this is the student that needs a 10th grade math class, but they are chronologically perhaps in 8th grade and maybe socially emotionally only at a 7th grade level. So how do you balance that difference, that discrepancy between their age and their intellectual age and their emotional age? Other questions that we struggle with that are listed there: how to balance the needs of a gifted child with the resources of the school, or how do we assess gifted students to determine their present levels of education when we're designing their gifted individualized education plan and the short-term learning outcomes and the specially designed instruction for them. So those are some of the sorts of questions that we struggle with. Additionally, you want to be able to list some of the resources that are available. So available databases for gifted education would be the National Association of the Gifted Children, or Hoagie's Gifted. Those are both databases that offer a broad collection of information about gifted students. The first being very academically oriented, the second being a broad variety of resources, both for those who are parenting gifted students, those who are teaching gifted students, and the gifted child themselves. And so two very different databases, but are both very useful. You also want to start to list some of the places that are the meccas, or the centers of gifted education, or the centers of your field in this case, gifted education. So, for example, the Johns Hopkins Center for Talented Youth or the Carnegie Mellon C-MITES program are both centers that deal very heavily with gifted education in our region, in Baltimore and Pittsburgh, respectively. Scandals: A Nation Deceived, attempting to look at the effects of test scores and the data about how effectively our gifted students are able to achieve, and what happens when you use No Child Left Behind and high stakes testing in schools, the effects of that on our gifted students. And so those would be some of the scandals that we struggle with in gifted ed. Other data sources that we use for making decisions within the gifted ed program or to designing gifted education would be state standardized test scores, Johns Hopkins test scores, and what they show us about gifted students and those gifted students over time, as well as being able to utilize the resources of that school for diagnostics. Terman's longitudinal study, which he started in 1921, and the impact of that study through 2010, we look at the lives of the termites. That's great information when you're looking at how do you tell and how do you know if a particular method of identifying students is effective, and what educational opportunities and community-based opportunities help those students to be able to be successful over the long term. Torrance's longitudinal study of the creativity quotient, or CQ. Goldman's studies of emotional quotient, the EQ. Those would all be good sources of data that can be utilized as a way to make arguments for the best way to design gifted education programs. Chronology of events is a section that allows you to highlight the key events within the field that you'd want your students to be aware of if you were teaching them about that field. So in gifted education, of course, it's important to know that in 1916, Terman publishes the Stanford revised version of the Binet-Simon scale. If you look in 1921, Terman initiates his genetic studies of genius, that longitudinal study I referenced a moment ago. In 1972, you have the Marland Report release, which attempts to develop a defined understanding of what it means to be gifted, as well as looking at some of the problems that happen when gifted students are limited to a regular education program and are not able to be offered some of the acceleration that is necessary to help them fully actualize their abilities. 1988, you have the Javits Bill passed by Congress, which provides some funding streams for gifted education. In 2000, gifted education in Pennsylvania is split from special education, and in 2008, as I mentioned before, you have the revision. So those are some of the highlights in the chronology of gifted education, and that's what you would include in that section. You're also asked to list the predominant beliefs and concerns of the field. And so you want to know what some of the things are that the experts in the field are struggling with, some of the things that they're concerned about, some of the issues that are first and foremost in the field. So, predominant belief in gifted education would be that gifted children need specially designed instruction to help them fully actualize their abilities, and also to help them become fully emotionally and socially adjusted. Another, differentiation and acceleration are necessary components of gifted education. And so in this section, you'll list the predominant concerns or predominant beliefs of the field. And then the next is listing the acronyms of the field. So of course in gifted education we have a whole slew of them, between the GWR, the NORA, the GIEP, the PLEPs, the STLOs, and the SDIs. And you want to know what those are so that you can develop perhaps a word bank as you're teaching it to your students. You can build those in as part of the active vocabulary. Because of course in order to become a professional in the field, it's important to become acquainted with the jargon of that field. And so as you develop this particular information template, you are now listing some of the key components of the discipline that you've chosen to design your unit around. And by listing all of these things, you start to think about the field as a professional would, and not as a teacher necessarily. And so this is one way to help you balance your expertise as an educational expert with the expertise of those who are simply working in the field each day, and marrying those two together. Is it hard work, and is it a lot of information to gather? Absolutely it is. But as gifted education professionals, we owe it to our students to be able to mirror and marry those two aspects, the content expertise as well as the expertise of an educational professional. And so this chart helps you to look at it from the content area, and then some of our other charts will allow us to more fully develop the educational component. Well, I hope that explains the gathering information template, and you tune in for further videos on some of the other templates that are available.